Hello, and thank you for joining us. My name is Brian Zimmerman. I'm the custom content editor with Becker's Healthcare, and I will be your moderator for this session. SPD best practices to avoid common barriers.
You're right, would you?
Before our speakers introduce themselves, I'd like to start with some tips to participate in the session. Please use the Q&A box to enter your questions for the speakers. We will address your questions throughout the session. At the conclusion of the presentation, we will discuss your questions, and to engage with fellow attendees, please use the group chat feature. If you experience any technical issues, please email support@mig.cc for assistance. It's now my pleasure to allow our speakers to go ahead and take a few moments to introduce themselves. Gabe, I'd love to start with you.
Good morning. Thanks, Brian. My name is Gabe Rensing. I have 12 years experience in the OR and SPD, both as a cardiac surgical tech and an SPD supervisor, quality assurance specialist. Last year, I had the opportunity to join Intuitive as an instrument and accessory support specialist. Currently, I'm an INA consultant, which part of the Genesis team that provides solutions in SPD for workflow optimization, efficiency, inventory management, cost reduction, and just overall program management. Also, we look at the data and try to impact customers who are having a high volume of returns, whether it's instruments, endoscopes, and get to the root cause of those damages. Base our training on that root cause analysis. I'm excited to be a part of this panel and talk through some of those barriers that we see.
Excited to have you here, Gabe. Kelly, how about you go next?
Sure. Good morning, everyone. My name is Kelly Brooks. I'm the Vice President of Surgical Services at Doctors Hospital of Augusta. I've been in the OR over 20 years. I've worked with robotics for over 12. I've helped create a couple of different programs in a couple of different hospitals in a few different states. So I'm excited to be here and talk about some of the things that I've seen, done, and heard, and I look forward to you guys enjoying our presentation.
Thanks for being here, Kelly. Damien, how about you?
Thank you, Brian, and thank you, everybody, today for attending. My name is Damien Berg. I'm a regional manager of sterile processing in northern Colorado, where I oversee 2 large healthcare facilities and chair of sterilization for 16 other facilities, and very heavily involved in robotics. I've been in the sterile processing world for 28 years now. I'm the past president of ISHM, just finished up my term in 2020, and I'm also an AMI fellow, an AMI board member that's sitting on several AMI committees and co-chairs 3 of them, one of them including the TIR for IFUs. So very heavily involved and glad to be here and participate with all this distinguished panel.
Great to have you here, Damien. And Caitlin, let's go with you.
Great, thanks. I'm Caitlin Godbold. I'm the robotic coordinator here in Savannah, Georgia at Memorial Health University Medical Center. I've been in the OR for about 3 years now, working with robotics for that time. And I've been the robotic coordinator for about 1.5 years. And looking forward to this panel and sharing all of our wisdom with everyone.
Thank you for being here, Caitlin. And so let's go ahead and dive into the questions I have here. And for the first one is, I kind of want to walk through a day in the life of the robotic case and, what are common challenges that come up. And so I'm wondering if one of you, maybe Caitlin, we could start with you here, could walk us through what it looks like from when the instruments get to the room to after they are used and then on to SPD. Wondering if you can just walk us through what that looks like in your world.
Yeah, sure. So what we typically do is our robotic instruments are located near our robotic room. So the teams actually pull the robotic instruments. We try to minimize as much touching of the instruments as possible. Our arms are wrapped. So just minimize any potentials for breakage and something being set on top of them. So the teams pull the instruments for their cases, come into the room. We open the room and everything. As I said, our arms are wrapped, cameras were wrapped and everything. So open up all of that. My team we've worked with SPD, and so we flush our arms and everything and all our ports as we finish the cases before they go on the carts and get the enzyme and everything. So we try to make it as seamless as possible for SPD for easy cleaning when it gets down there.
Great. Appreciate you walking us through all of that. And then Damien, why don't you tack on there, sort of talk about what it looks like in your world.
Absolutely. And, Caitlin and I, we've had some discussions in the past about the different processes and the partnership between OR and SPD and robotics, which is crucial to the success of the program. So everything Caitlin and her teams are doing in the OR sets us up for success in sterile processing. So once those instruments arrive in sterile processing, and we'll talk about that more as we delve into the further questions, but it really is a very complex multi-step process to reprocess any surgical instrument, but more especially the robotic instrument. The goal is to process them according to the IFUs, according to the standards, but also not forgetting that the decontamination world is not just robotic instruments. We've got orthopedics hitting us. We got cardiac hitting us. We've got ENT hitting us. We've got everything hitting us at the same time, robotic. So how do we merge robots and all this other stuff together without compromising the quality of the stuff? Well, it's through good practices. It's following the IFUs, getting training for your staff so that you can also get the arms through so they can be inspected and reprocessed and ready for the next surgical case. I've worked in robotic places where we do 1 to 2 robots a day to 10 to 20 robots a day, depends on the size of the facility I'm at. Currently, the goal is not to have hundreds and hundreds of arms in inventory if we can streamline our processing in sterile processing, get them sterile in appropriate time manner for the next day, and so that we can work with our clinical counterparts to ensure that the cases continue at the most efficient rate.
Great. I think both those answers sort of are setting the stage for what we'll talk about later as well. Kelly, do you have anything you wanna tack on here?
Sure. I'll just add one of the other things that we that we all need to make sure that we're looking at is when I first started at Cabell, I was checking out our entire process, our entire program, and I walked into Central Sterile Processing and I was watching what they were doing as far as cleaning the arms, and I'm sure my head went just like this. And I'm like, what on earth are you guys doing? Well, the issue was the sink size in Central Sterile was smaller than the instrumentation. Now, normally you need to submerge the arms and let them soak. So they were submerging 1/2 of the instrument, leaving it for a little bit, cleaning it, turning it over, and submerging the other half because their sink size was too small. What's even funnier is I've seen that at 2 different facilities. So in addition to your normal day-to-day and things that you have to do and making sure that we take into account all the other service lines, you got to look at the physical space and see if there's any barriers in that regard too, which may impact the cleanliness of the instrumentation and the workflow for your staff.
It's a great addition to those opening comments, really thinking about the physical space you're actually working in. And so the next question I want to jump to is, what are the best practices within the continuum of care with robotic instruments, and what are the correct and necessary steps to take with each piece? Damien, perhaps you could start us off here.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it all starts and stops in the procedure, in the operating room, during the procedure with point of use care. There's been a lot of discussion in the last couple of years at the national level on standards on, do we call it point of use cleaning? Do we call it point of use care? What do we call it? It really is care, caring for the surgical instrument at the field when it's being used so that the bioburden doesn't have time to really accumulate or build up. Like the surgical team cleaning or caring for that instrument during the entire case. And then, as Caitlin mentioned, by keeping them flushed and also moist after the case on their way to transporting to sterile processing is that first step. Once we can do that, the following these steps in the sterile processing decontaminated area makes it so much easier. We still have the IFUs to follow. We still have the steps that Intuitive has laid down that we must follow to achieve their validated processes, such as soaking, such as flushing, sonicking, brushing. All that fun stuff has to still be accomplished. But it makes it so much better once our care team, our partners, clinical partners, do their pieces in the actual operating room. Once it gets through the decontamination part, then it's really the instrument inspection team. So taking the time to really articulate the arms, to really hit those lubricating points, to really check the alignment of the tips and of the scissors, that there's no damage to them. And then it goes to the wrapping people. Now, again, we'll talk about this later, and Caitlin and Kelly have some good examples of whether you wrap an item, whether you put it in a peel pack item, whether you have the surgical instrument in a tray. All these are different options. At my facilities, we do blue wrap these items singly so that the surgical team, just like Caitlin said, can pick their arms during the day of. So that's that. And then, of course, sterilizing according to the IFUs. What steam parameter, what dry time, all that good stuff comes into it. So it's a multi-step process. I did a time study a couple of years ago where, 6 robot arms, 4 to 6 robot arms from a surgical case, by the time it hits decontam, by the time it's ready to be used, could follow in the IFUs, and my machine time and human touch time could lead up to 6 hours. So by following properly and doing the steps according to the IFUs, 6 hours for 4 to 6 arms. So you got to make sure you have the right sink size. You got to make sure you have a sonic. You got to make sure you have all these things in place will help with that time. But you can see the time constraints that we can have during this reprocessing. So it's a challenge, but it's a fun challenge that I love to work on. And my team actually, robots used to scare them. They don't anymore.
Appreciate that, Damien. Appreciate you walking us through that there. Gabe, how about from Intuitive's perspective? What do these best practices look like?
Well, Damon, I 100% agree. I think, reprocessing starts in the OR. Our reprocessing instructions state that the cleaning process should begin immediately after the procedure ends to kind of prevent that soil from drying on the instrument. Definitely within 60 minutes of the time the instruments are removed from the robot or, removed from the patient, we want to begin that cleaning process. So in the OR, what we want, what the IFU is asking for is that we remove all accessories, wipe off any excess soil that's on the instrument. We're going to prime it to make sure that we're keeping the inside of the instrument damp, and then also keep the outside of the instrument damp. So if that's a foam spray or soaking it in a bin. And it's also really helpful to have that point of use wall chart hanging in the OR to kind of make sure that we're checking all those boxes and hitting all those steps. Same thing in decontam. Also very important to have the wall chart hanging there for cleaning, making sure we're hitting those correct soak times for the instruments, endoscopes, and accessories, because all the soak times are a little different. All the steps for cleaning the instruments and endoscopes are the same, but there are those little differences. So very important, to have that wall chart. Also, like I said, the ultrasonic is a required step in the process, so we want to make sure we're doing that. The thermal disinfection through the automated washer is optional, so that's not a required step, but based on, your region or your hospital policies, that's where that optional thermal disinfection would come. And then when you get onto the prep and pack side, making sure we're drying it and lubricating it is a big thing, especially the staplers. We want to make sure we lubricate those, and then also inspect to make sure we've cleaned it properly, and that, it's not damaged going forward. We don't want to give the OR back a damaged instrument or endoscope. So 100% agree. Thanks, Damien.
Thank you so much, Gabe. Before I jump to our next question here, Caitlin, Kelly, anything to tack on to this best practices conversation?
Well, I think that the OR and SPD have to understand what those requirements are. So it's important that both sides are comfortable with doing what they need to do. Sometimes you have to reinforce that after a while. Especially getting the debris and everything off in the OR. Because at times, whenever you finish with a case and you get it back to central sterile, it's not like it's magically going to get cleaned straight away. Sometimes those items sit there. So I think reminding the staff the reason behind it and making sure they understand it and that they're wiping everything down the best that they can adds a lot to the process, especially if you have to turn them over for another case. So just reminding everyone is always a good thing.
I agree as well. Everything that everybody just said, but definitely reminding staff. I scrub as well, along with circulating. So it kind of keeps it in the forefront for me and talking with my scrubs and everything like that. And my lead tech does a really good job of staying up to date on everything that we need to do. So, and he's good about disseminating information if I don't get to it. So.
Great. Well, appreciate everyone weighing in on that one. And Kelly, you touched on something I think I want to get to the next question, which is sort of about the OR SPD communication or cooperation, right? So how does the OR and SPD department communicate? What are some gaps that exist there? And what have you done to, sort of bridge those gaps? And I'd love to get everybody's, let's open up this question to the whole panel here.
Well, I think, first of all, everyone has to understand they're all on the same page and they're all doing something for the same reason. I stress to all of my departments, we're a continuum when it comes to a journey through the day of a patient. So OR and SPD have to be on the same page. I equate that to the engine and the oil. The OR is the engine, central sterile is the oil. Without the oil, what happens to the engine? It breaks. So communication is one of those things that they have to be up on, making sure they understand the reason why they're doing stuff, making sure that they work with each other. Now, I've seen situations where they don't communicate well. One of the things that we started doing especially to prepare for the following day's cases, is having a 2 o'clock meeting in the afternoon. Central Sterile and OR have to come together to make sure that we've got the instrumentations prepared for the next day. And the best way to do that is to put them in a room together and let them talk. I think communication is a big piece of that. In addition to bridging that kind of gap, you have to sometimes make sure they understand what each other's responsibility is. And I think that is a big piece to the puzzle. No one quite knows what the other person does. They may not understand how long it takes. Sometimes the OR just wants to go, go, go. And we need that instrument. We need that instrument. If they don't understand that it takes an hour or so for that instrument to get through the first step of the process before it can be sterilized to be brought back to them. So in working with them in that regard, that allowed us to determine what our par level was to ensure that not only we had what we needed, but when we were in the middle of the day and cases were running, back and forth, that we had enough to take care of what was needed for everyone.
I couldn't agree more, Kelly. And, I've been doing this a while, just like we all have. I can tell you that's the first time I've been called oil. So I appreciate that. I've been called a lot worse, but I'll take oil any day of the week.
Good. I mean, come on,
No, that's a great analogy, really good analogy. And similar to Gabe, I call myself kind of bilingual. So I'm a prior scrub tech and I'm a sterile processing professional. So I speak both languages, and what you said about the meetings and getting them in the same room, so they're seeing that there's humans on both sides of the equation, not just people in other departments causing you pain. So everything you said is spot on. One thing that I did, especially a previous facility, a previous life, is we had a lot of unhappy docs. So we had a couple docs that were unhappy for whatever reason. So instrument quality issues, communication issues. Again, you've got your care team, your OR nurses and scrub techs, you got your sterile processing professionals, but we also have that equation of the provider or providers. So I met with them and I called my docs to watch. So I found out what unhappy docs I had, who they were, what was their problem, and was it sterile processing related, or was it just a myth or something that happened 6 months ago that they still hold on to and they don't want to let go, and I have to, watch them and work with them. But by many docs work on robotics in my facilities, but I only had 2 or 3 that were kind of antagonistic. So I focused on them, which most people kind of like stay away from those docs. I actually made them my docs to watch. So every time they were doing surgery, I was in the room at the start of the case. When the case was done, I was in the room at the end of the case, just because I wanted to let them know that I'm here for them. And also, if there was an issue, we can address it right then and there. I also invited them to my department. We'll talk about that later, so that they got to see the other side. I called it kind of like the chef's table, come and eat in the kitchen. Well, don't eat and decontam, but come and view decontam as a provider and see what it is. So having those docs to watch and being engaged with those providers also was a key part to helping communication amongst what you've already said, Kelly. And I know Caitlin's got great examples as well.
Yes, great tips and everything that y'all said up to now. Also, we in our area had SPD come, and one person a day came and kind of just watched cases for the day and saw like our flow, our turnovers and everything of that, and opening rooms and everything. And I think it helped them understand a lot more about our job in the OR. And then I do have people on my team who fill in and go down there for extra time in SPD too. So I feel like our team is well versed in what both sides of the equation of both departments and making everything work. So it has done wonders to help bridge the gap between SPD and the robotics department. And we have a great working relationship. We talk on the phone in the morning, or they come by and check on what we need for the day, if we're missing anything, any turnovers and all of that. So there's communication is probably the best thing, and building that communication and respect between each other and departments, and not pushing off blame on the other department and everything. So
100%. Damon, I think what I liked about what you said is that you're there in the OR if any issues do come up, and you're there, that you can communicate with them. And that goes a long way in the transparency of kind of finding out what the issues are that are coming up and collecting that data and being able to speak to, as an SPD, professional or leader, and say to a nurse in the OR, look, I'm not necessarily 99% accurate, even though I might assemble 10,000 instruments in a month and only have 50 reported issues. You might still be having an issue in the OR every day. And how do we bridge that gap of communication where I'm going to say I'm extremely accurate in my set assembly, but as an OR nurse, I'm also having issues every day. So that's the kind of the gap that we need to bridge between the two.
Mm-hmm. Agreed.
So some fascinating comments there about cooperation and communication, right? The importance of all that. And I think that gets to the next question, which you can't really have that cooperation, trust, as some have mentioned, without a layer of accountability there as well, right? So when it comes to sort of creating a culture of accountability, how do you make sure team members are taking ownership of things they've done versus pointing fingers elsewhere, Caitlin, maybe you could kick us off here and then everyone else can weigh in. Right.
I am a big believer in, unless obviously something that blatantly happens, like you drop a scope off the field or something like that. I'm a big believer in we all are accountable for our instruments, not just my scrub or the nurse or SPD. We're all a team, so it's a team effort. So I really don't try to point fingers with damage or any issues, and I try to emphasize, and the team is really good about, we use it as a learning tool. We don't have too many damaged things. I mean, it's going to happen. It's a reality of what we do, and things getting jostled or dropped and everything. But we use it as just a learning tool instead of pointing fingers. Because there's sometimes where you can't tell where the breakdown happened. Sometimes it's obvious, but other times it's not. And I'm not going to say it's SPD's fault or it's our fault and everything. We're just going to take it as a learning opportunity and see where we can go from here. What's a better way to ensure that this doesn't happen again?
Absolutely, Caitlin. And I think that's the heart of it. We see we're humans, right? Like Gabe said, things happen, but I think what I look for is patterns and trends. I look for the data behind things. If it's just a one-off event that happens, you said we learn from it, we move on. Most importantly, I always look at, is this error, this issue, this problem, did that impact patient care? That's the things that I go, okay, I want to stop that immediately and mitigate that, versus it's an annoying problem. We need to fix that as well too, but I change my priorities on that, should I say, and I focus the staff on it. And when you talk to sterile processing staff, you put that into perspective, like when something happens, this is what it did, the cause and effect. They understand that a little bit better, and I try to get to the person too. That's the other thing. I know when I was a tech, I had managers stand in front of all the sterile processing techs and say, all right, guys, make sure you're putting integrators on all your trays. We had a lot of integrators missing and da-da-da-da-da. And I'm like, well, I'm always putting integrators. Don't talk to me. I don't have a problem. And I'm sure I did, but that's way back then. I think more importantly is getting feedback from my clinical counterparts that, hey, we got a tray or an arm or something made by Damien, and here was the issue, here's what happened. Then I can follow up with Damien. I can say, hey, here's what it is, versus giving a generic statement to a group of techs. You can have one-on-one follow-up and say, and there's three things as a manager that I have to do. I have to make sure my team has the training to do the job. They have the tools to do the job. And if there's any barriers, I got to remove them. So those are the three things that keep me going up every day in my department in the ORs. But I can't do it without my clinical counterparts giving me feedback. And so I can hold not only myself accountable, but my team accountable as well.
And I'll just add a couple things to that too, because I think that, the thing about a robotic program, if you create your robotic program, you pick people that want to be in those rooms. And normally those people want to do a great job and want to take care of the instrumentation because they're going to get it back in another case. So they want it to work. They want to report stuff that doesn't work because, again, they don't want to get it back and have Dr. XYZ screaming at them. We don't. Nobody wants that. But I think that's also where shadowing comes in. Caitlin mentioned that earlier. We also use shadowing as a way to determine if there is issues with something we're doing. Say, for instance, we keep having scopes come back broken. Well, most of the time they don't just break on their own. It's something that we're doing, whether it's we're not putting it back in its case properly, whether we're stacking stuff on top of it in the room. So the best way to figure out if you have a systemic issue where you can make that generalized statement is to go look. However, if it's not a systemic issue, that means it's a one or two person thing. And that's where, to me, accountability comes in. And not just to beat them down and say, don't do that. Use it as an educational tool and then educate the whole team. You know, we put it in the container this way. We do it like this to prevent it from getting broken. You could have new orientees, you could have students, you could have anybody else in there that may not know the importance of doing things a certain way, or even physicians. So I think accountability is important by being able to track if there's an issue when it comes from Central Sterile, who has done it, so we can, again, educate, reinform, and make sure everyone's on the same page. But the same thing with the OR staff. Because in the grand scheme of things, we all have to be able to work together. And the less errors that we have on both sides of the fence, the better it is for everyone, and the easier it is to do your job every day.
Some great insights there. And we're going to get to audience questions here shortly, but I want to get to at least one more question before we jump to that. And we'll get some final thoughts as well from each of you. But before we get to final thoughts, let's cover what's in your trays, right? What do you put in the tray and what do you peel pack? And what is the impact of that on SPD? Damien, you want to start us off here, and then we can go around, and then we'll jump into final thoughts before we get to the Q&A.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'll give my perspective, and I think I can't remember, Kate or Kelly talked about it by having the huddles the day before. So we had our huddles with our OR counterpart to say what surgeries are the next day, so we can look. I mean, we've created a multitude of trays throughout the time, but really it's that joint partnership between OR and sterile processing and the providers to try to narrow it down. One thing we found out early on is if you get a really efficient provider and an efficient OR team, that they understand they don't need to open up a whole lot of stuff. They can minimize their arm usage that's appropriate for the type of case. They don't need a lot of stainless instruments. You know, we used to open up huge lab sets and all stuff, and then we created a robotic lab set instead of like 80, 50 to 80 instruments in there. Now I've got like 5 instruments that they open up that support the robotic case. But that's working with my clinical counterparts. I mean, we see the stuff come to sterile processing and decontam open and not used. Well, the OR needs that feedback. And my leaders like Caitlin and Kelly, I'd go, hey guys, I'm seeing this tray constantly come down and 90% is not used. Do you really need this other pieces? So those are how we built our trays. That's how we did it. Now, each hospital, each surgeon, each surgery is unique in its own set, but there's a certain formula, secret sauce, should I say, that some of these people discovered and said, this really works. And that's why we're here today, is kind of share that stuff with you. So I'm going to kind of pass it off to them to tell you their secret sauce on what works as far as how they built their trays and then made it successful.
Yeah, so we have a laparoscopic set tray that has 4 of our Da Vinci 8 trocars and then 112. And then we have a general stringer, a small stringer, just for application of anything that we use, and a couple of retractors, and then some laparoscopic instruments that each of the surgeons that do robotic surgery have input on as imperative for their to help with the procedure. And that's just one tray. And then the rest of it's just a camera that's wrapped, and we individually wrap all of our arms. So because we have a wide range of surgeries that are performed. So it's just easier to individually wrap them and apply them to the surgery. We have certain ones that we for sure use and open, and we keep that very minimal, between 2 and 4. And then we have some just on standby for if something changes in the case and you need that instrument, we'll unwrap it at that time. But we try to minimize having things go down that haven't been used, and just keep the instruments that are necessary and not having a huge pile of stuff in the room.
So, and from my perspective, I've seen a couple of different things over the years. When we first started with a lot of the robotic cases, we had, like Damien was saying, a huge tray, tons of stuff in it, 6 to 8 arms. Some of them you might use, some of them you didn't. So we started whittling down the trays based on the service line. Because what we found was most of your most of your urologists use the same things. Most of your GYN uses the same things. Most of your general surgery uses relatively the same thing. So we streamlined the trays based on service line and only put the arms in it that were used 90% of the time. Added a small stringer just like Caitlin and her team did. And then everything else was blue wrapped. It just makes it easier. So then that way you've got your primary set that'll work for each service line. And then you pick your onesie twosies for everybody else. Maybe this one likes a bipolar. Maybe this one likes, another device. Maybe this one likes this kind of grasper and this one likes that kind of grasper. So it made it a little easier for us. It made it a whole lot easier for Central Sterile. And then when the FDA regulations came out about, how many times you could use the items, we were already on the cusp of being able to handle that because we were already doing it. And so were they at Savannah. So it just makes it a whole lot easier, I think, on both parties. Now we just have the one tray and the few extras. We keep enough in the par level so that if something, if it uses all its lives or we need another one, that we've got it. But nowhere near the same amount of stock on the shelves wrapped, nowhere near the amount of trays that we need, and no more huge trays that had about 85 items in it. All of that's kind of gone away and made it so much easier for everybody. It also helps with turnaround too.
Yeah, Kelly, and that's what I was going to bring up too, is the FDA requirement, that we started tracking reprocessing cycles in the IFU and add that as a requirement. And that's really, caused us to recommend leaning down trays and peel packing things. And part of the Genesis team is that's what we do, is go in and look at usage and be able to make those recommendations on usage as what should be in trays and what can be peel packed, maybe even what's in the room not open opposed to what's open on the field for each procedure too. Kind of, as you said, cut down on cost, and then also cut down on, turning over instruments that weren't used. So you're not using that full-time employee to continue to turn over those instruments that weren't used.
Well, thank you all for laying all that out there, and I really appreciate everyone's participation. I do want to get to audience questions, but quickly, I'd love it if each of you could briefly share one or two key takeaways you'd like to share with our attendees today, and then we'll jump to the audience questions. Gabe, you can kick us off.
Yeah, I think the main thing I learned today is, communication between the OR and SPD is critical. And I think when you can get an SPD member of leadership into your robotic steering committee, that's a great place to start, to have someone like that join that team. So just so you'll be able to cover the wide range, from instruments all the way through, what we're doing for throughput and everything for case volume and things. It's great to have an SPD representative there in the robotic steering committee.
Kelly, why don't you go next?
Sure. So I think a couple things over the years that I've learned. First of all, if you're building a robotic committee, that steering committee is very important. You need to have representatives from not only your SPD, but from your OR leadership. You need to have surgeon involvement. You need to have anesthesia involvement. But the main reason that you want to have Central Sterile is so they hear what the surgeons have to say. Because a lot of times the surgeons like to use those types of meetings as a venting session. And that allows the SPD people to hear what they have to say. Most of the time they don't know them all that well unless they get called to their room to get yelled at. So that kind of opens that door. One of the things that I've seen happen in the past, and one of the things that we did, was our surgeon champion for our robotic committee went to SPD for a day. And he got firsthand knowledge on what happens, how busy they are, and exactly what they do. And at the next robotic steering committee meeting, he told about it. So it kind of boosted that team up in that regard. Those afternoon huddles, very, very important. It's everyone on the same page. It's everyone knowing what needs to happen for the next day. There's no surprises as far as what needs to be turned over and prepared. And then I think the last thing that I'll mention is make sure your teams definitely communicate. And the way that you can do that best is by letting them shadow and see what the other does. Damien's mentioned that, and so has Caitlin. It's very important for them to understand the other side of the fence. Because when all you do is working in OR all day, or all you work in SPD all day, you don't understand the minutia of things that happens that can create the difference in what little bit of stuff that could occur in that case, that could make it go from great to crazy, or from crazy to good. So in any case, I think as long as everyone has a focus on what they want to do, we set expectations, and then we follow through with some accountability, the robotic program will take care of itself.
Some great points, great things you all touched on during this conversation. Damien, one or two quick final thoughts from you.
Yeah, I mean, I'll stick, because we've said the same themes are amongst all our presenters, and I think that's why we're here today. But really, I'll speak to the sterile processing professionals out there. Don't be scared of robots. Don't be scared of robotics. Don't be scared to learn IFUs. It could be very daunting in the beginning, but really take your time. Working on a complex spine case with 27 loaners for revision is more complicated than robotics at times. So embrace robots, embrace the IFUs, follow them, speak to them, work with your OR counterparts, and just make this part of your everyday thing, because robotic surgery is here to stay. It's been here for a long time. So be part of it and embrace it. So that's what I'll share.
Thank you, Damien. Caitlin?
Yes, I think we can all drive home the point about communication. I think communication just makes everything go so much more seamlessly with all of our jobs. And then also, I think along with the communication, the teamwork is just pulling what is best for your facility. There's not a cookie cutter thing for everyone, but taking tidbits here and there that you learn from other people and saying, oh yeah, that could work here, and talking between SPD, your team, and everyone, and leadership and everything, and seeing what is best for your facility, along with the communication.
Brian, I had one more, actually. I apologize, I know time, but this one I thought it's important to just listen off Caitlin said. Also, there's another resource out there that I've used many times in my facilities, and that is using Intuitive. I have this service rep. He's kind of goofy, but his name's Nick. He does a great job. He actually comes to my facility. He does in-services. He trains. Gabe even brought it up too. When we're having issues, whether it be broken scopes or arm issues, they can help troubleshoot and show patterns and say, this is what I see around the country, Damien. Is your team doing this? Are you getting this done? Use your Intuitive resources. They actually developed a sterile processing team for us. So you don't have to do this alone. So use your resources.
Absolutely. And Damien, thanks for pointing that out. I appreciate it. And we're there, when we get a new system into a hospital, we're not there just to drop off the system and say good luck. We really integrate that training for all the staff. We're there to provide follow-up training as needed. And then we do look at that failure analysis as instruments get RMA'd and sent in, and endoscopes get sent in that are damaged. We look at that, and then we base some training on that as well, and can give some great, what to do in this situation to fix these issues.
Great, some important points to get in there. Really appreciate the conversation, everybody. And now we're gonna jump to the audience questions. And just as a reminder to everyone, you can submit your questions in the Q&A box. To get started, though, we're gonna take some questions we received from the registration process, and we've got a bunch of those to work from. We'll take a few before we close out here. So the first one we'll jump to, the attendee asks, how does your facility stay up to date with training needs? We just open that one up.
Well, again, I think that's one of those things when, at least on our end, how we stay open on training needs is by identifying, first of all, everybody who comes on board, whether a new tech or an experienced tech, they need annual competencies at minimum. So annual competencies in training, if you get a new product, say a new arm, or a new process, a new sterilizer, or a new sonic, then you need to also retrain at that point. And on top of that, if we're having issues or we're having challenges or we want to increase a production or change a quality metrics, then there's training that comes on top of that. So you don't train for training's sake, you train for what you're trying to do, and you set your frequency based off of, issues, annual, changes in people, changes in processes. And then, of course, the key thing is we all know you got to document it. If it's not documented, it didn't happen, and it has to be in their files. It has to be documented, and make it fun. That's what I do.
Excellent. The next question we'll jump to here is, let's see. Does your facility rely on intuitive reps to provide training, or is there an educator? Damien, I think you've talked a bit about sort of working with intuitive. Does anybody else have anything they'd like to tack onto that?
Yeah, so we actually just at the beginning of this year received the SP robot. We're just now getting to utilize that due to COVID. So we actually have Intuitive coming in, teaching about, there's just a little bit of finite differences with SP arms versus XI. And last year we had an Intuitive rep come in and do a brush up on robotic arms and processing and everything like that. So, but we also have an educator that people can go to do research and everything like that if they have questions or anything like that.
So I agree with Caitlin. One of the things that we've done is we definitely use our Intuitive rep, especially if we've got new devices, which we've got some new stuff that has just come out in Secret Seal. So we've got some education going on in that. But we've created annual competencies as well, not only for the surgical tech, but for the nurse, things that they need to do, troubleshooting, and other pieces to the puzzle that you don't always think of that could happen. So our educator assists with that. Our team lead for robotics assists with that. When we have a new staff member, they have to do the modules online and then have to do everything else before we let them start, working with the team. And then the team has their annual competency. So it's very important to ensure that when you get something new, you train the staff. And we always make sure that the team leader, the lead tech, any of our first assist, and our educator all are present for that education so that they can assist the new team members as we add them to ensure everything is being taken care of properly, and they do have those checkoffs complete before we leave them, to their own devices, so to speak.
We have had some wonderful questions come in. We'll get to the one or two more before we sign off here. So the next question I want to take is, are there intuitive resources that can be leveraged when a customer identifies instrument damage is occurring before the instrument reaches its end of life?
Yeah, I can speak to that. I know, we do have the return the instrument policy or the advanced exchange policy for the endoscopes, or the RMA policy for the instruments. Using the customer portal or contacting customer service, the customer can send back then the instruments that are damaged. We do have a failure analysis department that does, look at all those instruments and try to determine what that root cause again of that damage was, whether it was, a chemical maybe that wasn't compatible with the instrument that was used on it, or if a sterilizer that wasn't compatible, or just handling and care kind of thing. We can identify those, or if it was a manufacturing issue as well. All those types of things can be identified by sending back the instrument through the customer portal.
Great, thank you for sharing that, Gabe. And we're going to take one more audience question here. So this attendee asks if SPD is involved in your robotic committee meetings.
Yes.
Yes.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think if it's not, at least on the sterile processing side, if you're not at the table, then maybe you're on the menu. It's an old saying that goes back. So make sure you're at the table. So if you're not on the committee, talk to your clinical counterparts and say, hey, can we be there? Don't just take it for granted and go, oh, nobody invites me, I'm sterile processing. Elevate yourself. Elevate yourself.
Great to end on a place of consensus. So I think that'll do it for us. Thank you, Caitlin. Thank you, Damien. Thank you, Kelly. Thank you, Gabe, for being a part of this. And thanks everyone for attending this session. And I want to thank Intuitive for letting me be a part of this opportunity. So please remember to complete the survey at the end of the session. And Intuitive is constantly looking for new ways to improve. Enjoy your next session. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.